did actually have some slides, but I haven't been on it for a while and thought, at the end of the day, the whole concept behind this show when I first sort of started doing these shows, when I first started producing them, was the idea behind it is both the companies are invited and the audience is invited. And I thought in this case, because I did invite quite a few companies to this one, what I'm going to do is go through the companies that I invited. And anything good I say about the ones I invited doesn't mean anything not good about the other ones. I'm just simply going to talk about the ones I happen to invite. The other speakers can talk about the ones they invited. I'll walk through them. I'm going to do it in the order that they're in the program. And I'll just say, I'm going to give a couple of minutes on each one saying, this is why I invited these guys. This is my thesis, my reasoning for following this deal and inviting them to speak here. In advance of all that, I wanted to pass on a little anecdote because it's a good idea. When you get into a bull market, it's important to remember that you're going to get a lot of different sources of information. You're going to be talking to a lot of people from companies. A big part of this whole show, the whole idea is that you get a chance to listen to us, get a chance to listen to each company's story, and then go and talk to the companies themselves. So I wanted to relate this little promotion story to sort of give you a little background and prepare you a little bit before you go up to the booth to speak to these guys. So this promoter, he dies. He goes floating up to the pearly gates. It's a story, okay? He goes floating up to the pearly gates, and he's standing there, and St. Peter's at the gate. He's looking a little bit abashed, and the promoter's going, "Oh crap, he caught me out." And he's like, "Can I come in?" St. Peter kind of looks at him and shrugs and goes, "We're full." The promoter goes, "You're full? How can you be full? It's heaven. How is that even possible?" St. Peter shrugs, goes, "Fine print? You didn't look?" And he goes, "So what? Do I have to go to the other place?" And he went, "I don't know what I can do." The promoter stands there for a couple of minutes and he goes, "Okay, so let me get this straight. You're full, but if some people leave, I can get in." St. Peter goes, "It's heaven. Who's going to be leaving heaven?" He goes, and the promoter says, "Can I just give it a shot? Will you give me half an hour, go in there, talk to people, and if I can convince a couple of people to leave, I get to stay?" St. Peter goes, "Okay. Yeah, okay, sure, all right." Promoter goes in. St. Peter waits. Thinks, half an hour, I got to yank him out of there, put him back where he should have been in the first place. Clerical error, what can you do? Half an hour later, these people start coming out through the gates. And there's more of them and more of them. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, there's this giant mass of thousands of people running in the other direction. And at the tail end of this huge mass of people, you see the promoter running behind them. St. Peter grabs him as he goes by and he goes, "What did you do? Where are all those people going?" And the promoter went, "Well, they're going to the other place." Looks at him and goes, "Why would anyone do that?" The promoter said, "Well, I told them, look, you guys haven't seen the place yet. You've only been here. You haven't been there." He said, if you went there first, you wouldn't believe it. Wall-to-wall gold, all the food you can eat, dancing girls, dancing boys, riches you can't imagine. Young, beautiful, for all eternity. He said, "I did such a great job." All these people said, "I got to check this out. That sounds like that's where I want to be. I don't know what I'm doing, waste my time in heaven." And St. Peter looked at him and he goes, "Well, yeah, but obviously that's not true." He said, "Aside from the fact you lied to these people, why would you even be following them? I mean, you've got 1 million people leave heaven to go to hell based on this crazy story, and you're going to go with them?" And the promoter looked at him and goes, "It could be true." Welcome to the junior resource market, people. Okay, I'm going to just quickly walk through the companies that I invited here. Like I said, I'm going to do it in the order they're in the program. So I'm just going to basically give you this. This is my thesis why I'm covering them, and these are going to be 2-minute versions. So I'm going to go through this pretty fast. First one, Red Lake Gold, West Red Lake. RLG is a symbol. Couple of reasons for that. One is address. I mean, they're in Red Lake. That is an area that has sort of a built-in following. That's one thing that's always nice to look for when you're looking at these stocks. If you can find one where they're going to get a lot of traction simply based on the area, that obviously gives them, that gives them fairly good odds of getting gains. And I'm not necessarily even saying it's better odds of finding something, just better odds of getting gains, because the market's going to support it because they like the area. Their project does have a 1 million ounce resource on it. Is that resource economic right now under current conditions? I have no idea. I don't think they have any idea. My gut feel is it probably needs to be a little bit bigger. And it needs a lot more holes anyway to see whether it hangs together. But again, that resource gives them an underpinning, gives them some foundation, some value to the foundational value. But what I really liked about it was what they're going to be drilling next, because it's an area that hasn't seen a lot of holes, unusually for Red Lake. And there's a structural intersection. That's where they're going to focus on. It's where a couple of deformation zones come together. And basically, you tend to get a lot more movement. It opens up spaces. So to my mind, if there's going to be a spot on the property where you're more likely to get thicker and higher grade sections, it's going to be in that structural intersection. So it's essentially a drill, even though they have a resource, in my mind, I view it as a drill play. So that's basically the reason why I picked up on that one. The next one in the program that I invited, and probably we all invited, Kaminak. That one's kind of obvious and sort of a foregone conclusion. I won't really spend any time on it. I know Ira was talking about, it's still 2 months of the vote and stuff, but I think it's safe to say that one's a done deal, so I'm not going to spend any time on it other than just say it's a very good example of what does work. It's not, if you don't know the company, it's a good idea to look at the company because it'll give a very good example of what does work. It'll give you a very good example of what larger companies are buying right now, since they are in fact buying it. Next one is PRG. There's a couple things I like about that one, aside from the fact I own mountains of it, which of course predisposes me. I've always liked that belt. I followed Gold Quest, and I still follow Gold Quest. That belt of rocks called the Terreo Belt, it's kind of Gold Quest discovery, if you will. It was not felt to be a prospective area before Gold Quest went in there. It was their former president, Alistair Waddell, who first sort of posited that this is the right age of rocks. There could be deposits here like there are other areas in the Caribbean Basin, and it had never really been worked that much. They had made the initial discoveries there. They subsequently made the Romero discovery that Gold Quest is in pre-feasibility on now. They should have a PFS out in 3 or 4 months, I guess. Precipitate went in and staked next to them. I like the fact that it's new, that most of this stuff has never been explored before, because I do think those are the ones where you can really get the market's imagination, because you basically haven't written them off yet. As long as it looks like the targets have scale. Scale of target is obviously important. The bigger the potential scale is, the more likely it is that the market's going to give you value for the exploration attempt before you even get results. Because there tends to be more anticipatory buying in companies that have projects with the biggest scale potential, just because the potential prize is larger. So I do like large scale targets when they're available. And I would say that one is. The next one on the list is Colorado. In a sense, that one's fairly obvious. I started following Colorado before they made the North Rock discovery, which they're not really focused on now, but that was a porphyry discovery. Same area, like about 100 kilometers north of there, I suppose. It's a very strong technical group. It's a technical group that has a lot of experience in that particular area. Most of the directors are geologists, and most of them are directors with a significant amount of their career experience is actually in northern BC and in the Golden Triangle. And it's not an easy place. It's steep. The rocks are pretty chopped up. Having guys that have spent enough time working in the area is a big advantage. I like that target specifically because I like the fact that they went back at an area that had been worked before. They've reinterpreted what they think is going on there. And in doing that, they've basically generated something that has good target scale. There are old drill holes in that are good, but the reinterpretation they've done where they think the zones are basically following the margin of these dikes, or sills actually. Each one of those sills looks like it's probably got enough room to be a 500,000 to 1 million ounce target if the grades are strong enough. So that the combination of those gives it the target scale. It's like anything else where they're going to have to drill it. The other thing I like about that particular target is just the geometry of the target in relation to the surface. With a 5,000 meter drill program, which is the current plan, they can drill 20 or 30 holes. And I tend to like situations where when they start a drill program, I don't like situations where a company does a drill program and it's just like plop, there's our results. I want to see a situation where they're going to deliver 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 results. I mean, that gives the market a chance to get excited about it. That gives you a lot more opportunities to trade it. And the simple fact is, if a company puts out good results and says, okay, we're done drilling, here's our great drill hole, we're going to be back there in a year, yeah, you'll get a spike, but it's not going to maintain the price. It's too long until the next piece of data comes. The company puts out the first 3 of 20 drill holes, and one of them's a great hole, and goes, oh, look at this, here's our great drill hole. There's 5 more drill releases coming. It's going to go up, but it's probably not going to go back down until people see those results as delivered. I mean, you're going to get way more bang for your buck in a multi-news release drill program. So I tend to prefer those. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Pure Gold. Pure Gold, it's another one of those companies I have some history with. I actually worked at Nevsun my last 2 summers of high school. It was a much nastier place then. The mill, I'm happy to say the mill that I worked in no longer exists, because it was kind of a death trap, quite frankly. But I managed to get out in one piece. But that's since been torn down. Claude built a new mill, new head frame, new everything. What I like about Nevsun, again, it's also in the Red Lake camp. They've got about 1 million ounce resource there in 2 or 3 different zones. Most of the resource is deep in the workings. The workings are, the upper workings at least, are in good shape because Claude was in there fairly recently. Everything else, like the head frame, the hoist, the mill, all of that stuff is like 10 years old. Claude rebuilt all of it. So when they picked up the project, they're basically getting all that infrastructure essentially for nothing. And one of the important aspects about that one is it's permitted. The mill, the head frame, the tailings impoundment, they all still have current operating permits. So should they decide that they want to try to put it back into production, it's not going to be something where it's going to be this 2 or 3 year permitting timeline and rebuilding everything. In theory, they could probably get the thing back in production like very quickly, like in the matter of a few months, I think. The other thing that I liked about it is in doing their research, they, again, and this is a recurring theme, you'll see this a lot, they reinterpreted the geology. Most of the zones at the Nevsun mine in the main underground workings are what's called the Austin Tuff, just a volcanic unit that's the host to most of the high-grade veins in this project area. There's a second tuff unit called the McVeigh Tuff, which is just west of the workings. Claude put another set of shallow workings just with a ramp on that stuff. That's probably maybe 200,000 of the 1 million ounces is in the McVeigh Tuff. For whatever reason, that unit never really got as much attention in the past. It never got drilled as much as the main one, which, I mean, obviously they had workings down to 2,600 feet, so there was lots of drill holes in that. Part of the reinterpretation these guys did was and this is fairly recent, I mean, they recognized that those 2 tuff units are actually the 2 limbs of a fold. And the nose of the fold has eroded away. So right now, if you look at it now, all you see is these 2 separate tuff units. It was assumed until recently that those were 2 separate events that created those. Pure Gold's theory, and they seem to have proved it with some recent drill holes, is that the McVeigh Tuff is, in fact, the Austin Tuff. They are the same rock unit. That's important because that implies there's a lot more room to add ounces there. Like I said, they've got about 1 million, but I think there's room for that to grow. And because they've got installed plant that's already permitted, getting that thing into production is probably a $20 million exercise, I would say. The mill that they've got now isn't a large one. They could probably push it to 500 or 600, but they are actually permitted to 1,100 tons. So if it got large enough, moving that from 500 to say 1,000 tons also isn't that expensive, probably another 20 million. But the permits are in place, and to me, that's a really big advantage because permitting is painful everywhere. It just is. It takes a long time. The next one is Almadex. Almaden we followed for a long time, and it's still kind of on the list. It's an interesting company. It's a local Vancouver company, father and son. They've done a great job over the years. They're prospect generators, I suppose they would be defined as. I'm not sure they are defined as prospect generators. I'm not sure I'm not sure Dwayne and Morgan define themselves as prospect generators, but that's how the market views them. And by that I mean they're a company that goes out, generates their own projects, stakes them, brings them up a little bit, defines targets, and then tries to find partners to work on those. You know, in the case of Almaden, they made a discovery, and they're actually in pre-feasibility now, I suppose. With the discovery on that one, they spun everything else out into Almadex. Almadex is sort of the spin out from Almaden. So everything other than this one project that's going through feasibility got put into the second one. It's an interesting deal because it's fairly cheap, it's well financed. They've got about 20 projects, but although, like I said, the market views it as a prospect generator, they've got guys in place, they've got their own equipment, they can drill extremely cheaply in Mexico, which is where they have been focusing for the last decade or so. They're a group that in all likelihood, if they like a project, they will probably put the first few holes in it themselves because they can do it quite cheaply, which I like. I don't have a problem with the prospect generator model, but I'm just my own temperament is I'm one of those guys that would like to see, I like to see companies take a shot at it themselves. If you like the target enough to think it should be drilled, then drill it yourself. That's just my viewpoint. And even though they're defined as a prospect generator, in my mind they're really not. Stuff they really like, they'll put holes in themselves. And these guys have a history of 2 or 3 discoveries already. It's just, you know, it's a group of guys that basically just knows what they're doing. So that's the reason that one's on the list. Now we move to today's, and actually 3 of the guys are sitting at the table here. How simple is that? Silvercrest, very simple reason behind that one. I followed the original Silvercrest. It was taken over last year. Silvercrest Metals is a spin-out from Silvercrest Mines, which was taken over by First Majestic last year. I've known the management group for probably 15 years, followed Silvercrest for a very long time. It's one of a very small number of juniors, and the truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, the number of juniors that pull us off is, in fact, quite small. Made a discovery, developed it, put it in production, very successful mine, got taken out, win-win, the end. They spun it off into a new deal. That new deal, again, because it was just the way the merger was structured, the spin-out was very well financed. Came out with $5 million, very tight share structure, 2 or 3 projects, one specifically that they really like in Sonora, very close to the mine that they discovered and developed and just sold. These guys know what a good project looks like. They're guys that don't waste money. They're not going to be they're not the kind of guys that get romantic about a project. I mean, the one thing I told people when they did the spin-out, I just said, I think this thing's about as close to a no-brainer as you're going to get. It's trading below cash. These aren't guys that are going to sing you lullabies. They're not going to be like the guy in the story that I started with. They'll go and put a few holes in. If they don't like it, they'll drop kick it and move on, which is what you want. The simple truth is most projects at the end of the day don't work. So what you want to see in a management group is a management group that's willing to walk away from projects. Because at the end of the day, you will be walking away from almost all projects. That's simply how the odds work in the exploration business. So the sooner somebody can make that decision, the better it is for everybody. And that's one thing I know about that management group. If they see red flags, they'll just move on because they can always find another project. I happen to like the project they've got. It's high-grade silver. It looks like it's got a lot of potential. It's something that wasn't worked for a very long time because it was several different owners, and there were the usual kind of legal problems and lawsuits and blah, blah, blah. It took Eric Fear a long time to pull that thing together. But he liked it enough where when they did the merger, it was either we take this project into our spin-out company or it's no deal. So, I mean, that tells you how much the guy likes the project. He was in the middle of a merger transaction, and he said the merger's not happening unless I get to take this property and put it into the spin-out. So that's good enough for me. Having done well with these guys in the past, I'm quite happy to take their word for it and play along. The next one is Northern Shield. Northern Shield is a fairly recent pick, and it's interesting. And again, this illustrates a point that I was talking about earlier, but it's important in a, you know, when I decided that we were in fact in a new bull market, I have a fondness for early stage stories. There's a couple of things that make Northern Shield stand out for me. One is the management group. They've always sort of specialized in looking for these magmatic deposits, copper, nickel, PGM deposits. It's a fairly esoteric sub-area of the exploration business. There's only so many people that are good at finding these things. It is a bit specialized. This management group, they've been doing it for 15 years, so they have a lot of credibility with the market. They have a lot of credibility with larger companies when they present new targets to them. And in this case, what they're focusing on this year is 2 targets that, as far as they can tell, as far as I can tell, have never been worked on before. And again, I really like the concept where it's a brand new target where the scale hasn't been bounded yet. You know, obviously the fact it's a new target doesn't guarantee success, but it also, you're not starting with a situation where you're saying the biggest this could possibly be is X. This thing could be very large, and the deposit type they're looking for, I mean, Ian will walk you through it, but the deposit type they're looking for, they tend by their nature to be very large deposits, so the potential in situ value is very large. And in a bull market, that tells me if we get in early enough, there should be, I expect a significant amount of anticipatory buying. There's already been a lot of it, and that sets up a situation which is the best place to be if you're speculating on early stage exploration stocks. If you can get in early, if you're at the front end rather than the tail end of the anticipatory buying, the market revalues a stock in a market like this 200 or 300%. I mean, if you're starting cheap, 200 or 300% or who knows what, before the data changes, before the drill holes show up. That puts you in a uniquely favorable position as a speculator where you can take enough off the table to zero out your costs, and you have a zero cost, zero risk drill play, and it don't get any better than that in the junior space. That's what I try to find for my readers, is situations where ideally you can trade out, and by the time the drill holes start showing up, the stock doesn't owe you anything, you know. And if it hits, fantastic. If it doesn't hit, you're not going to get hurt that badly, and you can move on to the next thing. You got to play the averages of this stuff. That's, you know, you're dealing with high risk stuff to begin with. You're dealing with projects where most of them aren't going to work out. That's the reality. You got to play the averages. The next one is Sirios. Sorry, Sirios it's an area I've always, you know, I've known Dominic a long time. I really like him. Very good geologist. I like the area that he's in. It's the area of the Eleanor discovery that was the reason that the original Virginia Gold was taken over, and then became Virginia Mines, and that again was taken over. It's now a part of a Cisco. That was a very successful. That was a very successful company. Great discovery. Eleanor's had its hiccups as they put it into production. It hasn't been as simple as everybody hoped, but it sounds like Goldcorp is kind of getting on top of it now, and they're starting to see better production rates, lower costs. It's a fairly large deposit. That whole area, you know, really the whole area of northern Quebec that Dominic's been working in and that Virginia specialized in working in, a lot of it was opened up by Hydro-Quebec when they built these giant hydro projects. There were roads, there were camps, there were airstrips in this area for the first time. Everybody knew the geology was prospective, but the logistics were horrible really before Hydro-Quebec came along. They took advantage of that, and Dominic's doing the same thing. He's been working on this project Chichu for a long time. You know, is it a done deal yet? No, it's early stage. It's a drill discovery. He put out a very nice hole recently. It's had a lot of holes in it, but it looks like they're starting to get a handle on what's controlling the gold mineralization. And again, because of the area, because of the management, because Quebec has a very vibrant exploration culture and a very vibrant exploration funding culture, I felt it was a stock that would get traction because of all those things, which it has. Again, I started talking about it at 20 cents. I think it's 44, 45 now. They just raised $5 million, which essentially lowers the risk because Dominic can just drill till the end of the year now if he wants to. And they brought in a couple of very large players, including Goldcorp, came in on that placement, which tells me that they see enough value there that they're willing to buck up some cash. You know, it's a drill spec. They're going to have to drill it. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But it's one that's going to get a lot of attention and is very liquid, and it's a good stock to follow because of all of that. I'll go quickly through a couple of ones that haven't presented yet. They'll be presenting this afternoon. Constantine, very good base metal project in Alaska. Base metals, the market doesn't care about all that much right now. They're partner funded. They've got a Japanese partner, Dowa Metals, has to spend $22 million to earn 49%. They've done most of that. By the end of this year, there'll probably be a couple $1 million left for Dowa to spend. That's going to actually get thrown into the JV account. It's got, I mean, don't quote me on this. I'm sure Garfield can tell you, but they've got about 8 or 9 million tons. It's fairly close. very close in my mind to being probably an economic deposit. This type of VMS deposit, they're generally not that big when the mine starts. 5 to 10 million tons is usually how big they are. They tend to occur in clusters. They're going to go actually looking for some other ones this year where they're going through permitting. They have to permit a decline and a road. Well, that's being done. They're going to actually go and look. There's a lot of occurrences around that. I visited the property a couple of years ago. There's a lot of stuff that's basically sticking out at surface that's never been drilled or anything, so they're going to hit some of that this year. So I think the odds of them making a new discovery, it's virtually certain, and I just don't know how good the drill holes are going to be. But some of the stuff they're drilling is stuff where I stood in the outcrop. You can see the zinc, it's there. They just don't know how big it is or what the grade's going to be. But you know, they do have partner funding. They have some gold projects I'm hoping to see. They have some pretty interesting gold projects, and I'm hoping to see those get active this year. I think, you know, with the way the market's changed in the last month, they told me they're actually getting a lot of approaches from other companies, so I think the odds of them JVing a couple of the gold projects, which would probably be more to traders' liking, seeing those get worked on, I think is probably fairly good. You know, a year ago it would have been tougher, but in the market we're in now, you've got a lot of guys, you've got a lot of promoters, a lot of companies looking for gold targets that they can work on, because they know that's what people want. Okay, second last one on the list, Adamera. That one's, you know, it's one of those companies where the guy running it is a very good geologist, very frugal. He had the misfortune of starting the company at the start of a bear market. Pretty much the entire history of this company has been in a bear market. So he's had to scramble really the whole time to kind of raise small amounts of money, try to work as efficiently as he could, not spend any more than he had to. They're just doing they're just closing off a very cheap financing now, a lot of it with people that are already on the stock like me. That will kind of get their balance sheet back in order. I would expect him to do another financing fairly quickly. What I like about his projects is, it's a set of them. They're all in northeastern Washington State. It's an area called the Republic Graben. There are several former mines that are the most recent, which shut down a few months ago. The mill is still there. These are high grade. Most of them are epithermal. Some of them are sediment hosted. But as a group, there's probably 6 or 7 former producers there that probably are, I don't know, 6 to 8 million ounces between them. Really nice grades, very profitable. It was Kinross that just finished mining the last deposit there. Their operation at Republic was probably their most profitable division, even though it was far from the largest. Cash costs were quite low. Logistics are fantastic. I mean, you can drive on all of these projects. You can work on them cheaply. So that one, I think, I like the targets. He's redone. He spent a lot of time figuring out, you know, and redoing the targeting really on a lot of these projects. He's got his own ideas about why the gold's where it is. He's actually adding a whole bunch of ground right now. But he's finally in a market where I think he'll be able to go out fairly simply, I think, raise a bit more money, fly some airborne on this bigger project, and attack some of these targets. And it's cheap. Not to put too fine a point on it, it's cheap. It's trading at like 4 cents, so it's not something where you're paying $20 for a drill test. It's 4 cents. You have to accept the fact that he is, to my mind, he is definitely going to have to do at least one more financing. So recognize there will have to be at least one more placement. The last one on the list is, and they are the last one on the list today. You know, the largest company on my list, one I followed since before was a producer, and that's Nevsun. In my opinion, I think Biche is the best base metal mine in the world, and it's one of those things where the stock's always been a good value, and this is another one of those things you have to keep in mind. Is it's a good value for political reasons. Eritrea is not everybody's favorite country. Politically, it's a pariah. The UN has had sanctions against it for one reason or another almost constantly ever since the country came into existence. And you know, that's something, if you're going to follow a company that's in an area like that, you have to accept the fact you're going to get a political discount. That said, they've never had a lot of problems working there. Another company I followed called Sunridge made a discovery there. They were just taken out by a Chinese company. Nevsun, what I liked about it was, one, it was just a great mine. They had $500 million in cash. It was trading at like $4. They had probably $250, $275 in cash, backing up They pay a dividend, 4 cents US per quarter. You know, it was basically a value stock. They did something about 2 weeks ago that I thought was brilliant. They basically had a takeover offer for another company that I follow called Reservoir. Very similar in the sense that it's one of those spectacular high-grade base metal deposits you don't come along very often. Theirs happens to be in Serbia, which I think is a place most people are a lot more comfortable about. It's a mining area. It's a fantastic discovery. And the marriage of those two companies makes a huge amount of sense because Nevsun has the people, but Nevsun also has the cash. They were able to basically buy out Freeport-McMoRan, which is Reservoir's partner. Theoretically, they have enough cash probably to put this thing in production without having to go back to the market at all, without having to issue any debt. I mean, prevailing interest rates at next to nothing. If I was them, I would issue debt, but it's one of those things when the merger happened, it was so obvious after the fact. I was like, shit, of course. Because their shareholders were waiting for years for them to take something over. And they waited until the market turned and it was right. And I think that's a great merger, and that's one you should definitely pay attention to. It's not a junior, so you know it's going to move with metal prices and stuff. But I think Nevsun's always been an extraordinarily successful company, and I think it's going to be even more successful with those two mines put together.